Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Arcfield was launched as a standalone company in 2021, but it has a long history in the aerospace industry, dating back to 1957. The company was created to serve a single purpose: to solve the most complex and demanding national security and space-related challenges. Recently, Arcfield announced the acquisition of Orion Space Solutions, a company that applies fundamental space physics knowledge to solve real-world problems encountered in the space environment. My guest on this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast is Kevin Kelly, CEO of Arcfield. And Kelvin, welcome back to the program.
Appreciate the time and the conversation, Tom.
Let's start off with a 30,000-foot view of Arcfield, and then we'll drill down a little closer to ground level.
Sure. As you mentioned, the company was founded a couple of years ago. We carved the business out of a larger company called Patton, and really took the assets that were focusing on space, hypersonics, and cybersecurity as it relates to national security missions, and to a lesser extent to some of the commercial industry, and really put a focus on growing that business across all of our market areas. And that's really what led us to the acquisition of Orion recently.
But the company's legacy goes back to some really of the major players in the aerospace industry.
It does. The bulk of our business dates back to the GE Aerospace days, where GE was heavily involved in the systems engineering and integration and the building of some of our nation's first really comprehensive national security space missions, focusing mostly on defense and intelligence applications. And that legacy business still is resident within Arcfield today. We have another long-lived piece of business that has supported the United States Navy in strategic programs, which is their ballistic missile program, doing engineering, analysis, modeling, simulation, and risk reduction for some of the Navy's most critical weapons programs. So, as you'd mentioned earlier, those two businesses are decades old, and they have heritage company names like GE Aerospace, Lockheed Martin, the SI Corporation, Vencor, Perspecta, ITT, and the like. So there's some pretty well-known brand names there.
So how did that spin out happen? What caused you to want to become a standalone company?
Really twofold. The systems engineering and integration work for the defense and intelligence satellite systems presented a bit of a conflict of interest for Patton, because they were also manufacturing some of those systems, and typically can't be on both sides of the fence. You either have to engineer it or build it. And we clearly were heavily focused on design, engineering, modeling, simulation, and so forth. So that really was the genesis for it. And then the owner, which is our current owner of both companies, Veritas Capital Partners, which is an private equity investment firm in New York City, started to look at other aspects of the portfolio within Patton that might make a more comprehensive company within Arcfield. And that's where we picked up some of the ballistic missile programs, the hypersonic programs, Arcfield Canada, which supports the Canadian F-18, our cybersecurity cross-domain solution business, and that created a more comprehensive provider that is now Arcfield today.
So your business seems to be focused largely on military and defense capabilities. How does that all tie into the commercial space sector?
As it relates to space, the two are becoming increasingly more intertwined. Traditionally, and my support of the space industry, I actually am a legacy Lockheed Martin employee from the early 90s and worked the bulk of my career after that at Bell Laboratories, but I returned to this business. I know the space business really well, and these end customers really well. Back then, there really was almost no interaction between commercial space and defense and intelligence, and that's simply not the case now. There's a lot of interaction as the cost of launch has gone down. The commercial industry has been launching more payloads for communications, for sensing, for exploration, the return to manned space flight here soon, and another mission to the moon has really re-energized the commercial industry to invest in space-based solutions. I think that, in combination with the push to create more broadband solutions to serve the unserved globally, has encouraged companies to invest in this area, and that is creating opportunities for companies like Arcfield to take advantage of commercial-based communications and sensing solutions and integrate those into national security missions.
Let's talk about that private launch piece of it. Is it your sense that the defense and national security folks were slow, or even maybe a little reluctant to rely on a commercial provider to launch their satellites, or were they very eager to adopt that model?
I can't speak for them. I can speak of my vantage point. I was very skeptical that Amazon or SpaceX or Virgin Galactic were ever going to make this a for-profit endeavor. In my 30 plus years supporting this industry, I can tell you that launch is one of the most expensive and risky aspects of these entire missions. And creating a for-profit industry out of launch just seemed a bit too far-fetched for my imagination, but clearly I am wrong. SpaceX launched, I think it was 90 Falcon missions last year. They're targeting upwards around 100 in the next 24 months. They're putting hundreds of payloads into orbit, and that has really driven down the launch cost. And so, what people like me, long lived in this industry, took for granted was that the cost of launch was a fixed and ever increasing aspect of our business. Is just simply not true. They are amortizing the cost and being able to reuse boosters and first segment flight components in the launch process over and over again. I think SpaceX boasted they reused one of their boosters for the 16th or 18th time this past year, and all of those things are unheard of. The reuse, the heavy lift capability, the ability to put dozens of payloads on a single rocket and launch into space has really driven down the individual launch cost per space asset. And the government long ago turned towards those commercial providers and said, we believe, there's still some hurdles that we have to overcome, but we're certainly making good use of them.
Right, but it is still an expensive business. I'm sure you're aware that Sir Richard Branson just recently kind of gave up on Virgin Orbit and says he doesn't have any more money really to put into Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, a bit of a different model. He was focusing on space tourism and kind of the heavy lift exquisite launch, which is different than SpaceX, which is really seeking to be the Uber ride into space. They're for all comers, you tell me your size, weight, and power needs, and we'll find a space in our fairing for you.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. You talked about it a little bit, but go a little bit more in depth about how you got involved in the industry.
Oh, sure. I'm an electrical engineer. Got my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Penn State. One of my first jobs out of college was with GE Aerospace, which became Lockheed Martin. And I'm a digital signal processing guy. I've got microwave and radio wave processing as part of my background. I never envisioned actually getting into the space industry. I was mostly focused on terrestrial wireless communications, and a program manager in Lockheed approached me after a few years being in the business and said, "Hey, we'd like to take advantage of your capabilities on a space payload program, and really think that your expertise in wireless communications are going to be well suited for this mission." I'll tell you, I was only in that program probably 4 or 5 months before I was hooked. It's just fascinating, and some of the environmental challenges and the physics challenges associated with wireless sensing and communications from space were to me just a fascinating place to be. And I've been involved throughout my entire career, although not solely dedicated to space programs, but I've been involved in every step of my career in contemplating, building, designing, and overseeing the development of space-based solutions for sensing, communications, and scientific exploration.
Well, Arcfield has locations now in 8 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. What expertise do those various locations bring to the organization?
It's funny, I get asked this question a lot. Why do you work where you work? The DC area is easy. That's the flagpole for federal government, and we have the bulk of our folks in this area. One of our largest locations is still Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. That was a GE Aerospace hub. They had an entire campus a long time ago, and that's really where they did a lot of the space systems engineering and integration work. We've got several locations out in Colorado, long time region for supporting both Air Force and now Space Force and intelligence community space programs. Given the high altitude and the clear weather, it just was a natural place that they built a lot of the space industry. And the Arcfield, Canada is solely there to support the Royal Canadian Air Force, and we're in Ottawa and Calgary being the heavy engineering and integration part of what we do, and of course the Ottawa region for the seat of government and more interaction there. So those are our big locations, and the rationale for why we're there as it relates to ballistic missiles and hypersonic programs. We're in Huntsville, Alabama, along with everybody else focused on that industry. Yeah. That's where Missile Defense Agency is. I guess in short, we are where our mission partners are, or where that legacy technology grew up.
You're everywhere but here in Florida.
Yeah, we only have a few folks in Florida. Obviously, there's a very large launch base there. Most of the space launches go out of the Cape, and I think before too long we'll have a larger operation in Florida for sure.
So, what are some of your other markets, your other verticals besides space?
Well, I mentioned the weapons programs with Missile Defense Agency, Navy, and Army. We do a fair amount of cyber security research for the Air Force Research Laboratories in Rome, New York, and we're branching out into some advanced data filtering capabilities to do more dynamic cybersecurity and data filtering on the fly. We do some high performance computing analysis. As we've acquired STC and Orion, that's brought us into the commercial industry. We're doing model-based systems engineering, digital twinning for both commercial companies and government agencies. And then Orion has brought us into space exploration, atmospherics, bathymetric LiDAR, which is the ability to do underwater studies from using an airborne asset and some LiDAR capability. So we're really starting to branch out into some exciting areas that we think are extensible across our traditional markets as well.
And we'll get a little bit more in depth about Orion here in just a moment. But I'm talking with Kevin Kelly, the CEO of Arcfield, on the Ex Terra Podcast. Take a moment right now to click on subscribe to be sure you don't miss any of our podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, any of the videos from Ex Terra, the Journal of Space Commerce. Let's talk about the acquisition of Orion Space Solutions, Kevin. What made that company attractive for acquisition?
Two things really rise to the top when looking at potential acquisition. It's culture and capability. And having a background in engineering, I know that we can engineer most things. Engineering a culture is typically a fool's errand. You've got to look at what is there and its alignment with the culture that we've established here at Arcfield. And we found a lot of synergies there. These are people that are very dedicated to solving hard problems for difficult missions. It can be in national security or other. They certainly have both. An inquisitive mindset that's not afraid to experiment and try new things, maybe invent new solutions. A collaborative culture that seeks to involve others throughout the business to make a fist out of the fingers, if you will. There's a lot of different capabilities throughout the business, so a willingness to pull in interdisciplinary expertise to solve hard problems. And ultimately, you have to find a capability that you need and don't have today. So we do an analysis every year of what our mission partners need, both government and commercial. We identify what those gap areas are. If it's capabilities that we believe we need to make part of Arcfield's enterprise, we can either buy it or build it. And we, in the case of buying it, it's finding the right company out there that is for sale or can be for sale, that has capabilities that we think will be germane to solving some of our harder mission problems. In the case of building it, we have an IRAD portfolio, independent research and development, and those are competitive projects internal to the company. We ask people to present abstracts, and it's a competitive process, and we fund the ones that we can fund and the ones that we can staff, and we build those capabilities and then make them part of our arsenal going forward.
Is there an acquisition strategy for Arcfield? Are you looking at other companies? And I don't want you to give away any company secrets, obviously, but is that something that is, you say you can buy it or build it? Are there other things out there that are attractive to you?
There are. We are always looking. And I'll talk about a handful of technologies without giving anything away that are going to be really germane to our core business, as well as the expanded space market that we've acquired with Orion. One is artificial intelligence. There's no doubt, more than just a buzzword,
Right.
that space-based applications require solutions that are going to put less of a demand on the uplink and downlink, because that is still the data choke point, if you will, for space architectures. So finding ways to do more intelligent analysis, computing, dissemination, even storage in space, as opposed to having to constantly return to the ground station, is going to be important. And so we have a fair amount of artificial intelligence within the business today. We're looking for novel solutions that we can make part of that business going forward. The other obvious one is just DevSecOps, the ability to do continuous software development. Most solutions have a heavy amount of software. We love to show satellites and sensory systems and high performance computing systems. In reality, many of those systems are tin wrapped software. There's a tremendous amount of investment going into the software that's embedded in those integrated solutions. And our ability to develop software faster and be able to reuse software modules and make that whole development process more efficient is key. So we're always, those are two areas that we are always looking for. There's a bunch of other bespoke areas in sensory technologies and position navigation and timing and being able to operate in denied GPS environments and things that get really nichey. But I think at the high level, those are the key areas.
Now, Orion is primarily a small sat and CubeSat manufacturer. So how are such satellites affecting the national security missions?
Well, we talked about the lower cost of launch and the ability to put these smaller solutions on a launch vehicle and put them into space. If you think about where we came from in the national security space, these were large strategic programs. They would take anywhere from 5 to 8 years to engineer and build. Then you go through a laden launch manifest. You get on that manifest. It could take you a year and a half to get into orbit. Once you get into orbit, you go through satellite acquisition, checking out all the solutions, deploying antennas, getting batteries charged, all this other. It's a very lengthy process to get those systems up and running. A solution that folks are more familiar with. Think of the Hubble telescope. You don't need 30 of them. You need one really good one. And so those were the types of national security solutions that we were providing. It's not very tactical. So if you think about defense, think about Ukraine. Kind of came out of nowhere, bit of a surprise. We had about a 20 to 30 day warning. If you don't have the national overhead assets pointed at Ukraine to give you communications and to be able to surveil, what the different militaries are doing and be able to discern their strategies, you're kind of stuck. You need a more tactical solution. And small sats and CubeSats can be engineered, built, designed, tested, deployed in 6 or 8 months. They're going to operate for maybe 2 years on orbit, and they'll deorbit after that, but they're far less expensive. They're much quicker to develop, and we can replenish them pretty quickly. So they're playing a pretty critical role in the tactical space mission.
Almost like the rest of our throwaway society. Put it up there, use it until it is no longer useful, and then throw it away.
Yeah, it's true.
So what other uses do you see for some of these smaller satellites outside the defense industry?
Proof of concept. I think that is a great application for small sats and CubeSats because they're inexpensive, because we can design and put them up into space relatively quickly. They're not unlike the national programs where they have experimental payload slots that allow for experiments to be launched along with the satellite. And that might be brand new sensor technology, different communications technology, putting encryption into space, testing out different waveforms, doing space situational awareness, testing out next generation radar, using terahertz imaging. These are all kind of advanced technologies that if you want to hasten the development of those technologies and get them into a space program, you can do a lot of benchtop testing, but nothing replaces testing in situ in the environment. So you can use sounding rockets for a 30-minute test, or you can use these small sats and CubeSats to put those next generation technologies on board and test them live for a year or two in space and really burn down the risk. And I see proof of concept as one of the best applications for those platforms.
So then how big a role is the commercial space industry playing in things like security and national defense? Outside of launch, I mean, we've covered that aspect of it.
Yeah, launch is the big one. If you think about, let's think about SpaceX's Skylink service.
Okay.
Or Starlink, I'm sorry, Starlink service. That is meant to be a global broadband provider for the served and unserved, to be a competitor to terrestrial broadband. It's a fantastic mesh network in space with great capabilities, high throughput, and so forth. If you think about the national security missions, being able to disseminate information means send classified information or unclassified information, command and control, communications in general, down to the warfighter or to a forward deployed unit. Having a global network to do that is absolutely critical, and relying on the Air Force or Space Force or somebody to build that from the ground up is a very long-term endeavor. So clearly we're making good use of commercial systems in that way. The other way is, we see commercial industry investing in space-based computing. I don't think anybody's flying anything yet, but the ability to do quantum computing and high performance computing in space is going to be absolutely key. If you think about our data center infrastructure on Earth and all of the storage and computing and file servers and cloud-based applications that we have on Earth, if you can move that to put the cloud in space and be able to serve those applications, you've really extended the serviceability of the end user to a great degree and lessened the as I said before, the communications choke point of the uplink and the downlink. And so I think those are two big areas where national security is going to make good use of the commercial space industry in the near future.
But let's go back to that Ukraine example for just a moment, because when Starlink opened up access to that service to Ukraine because the Russians had shut off their internet, then the Russians said, well, now that's a military asset and we can take it out. So kind of where is that dynamic as far as it involves a commercial entity?
That is a great question. It is akin to an adversary attacking our power infrastructure or our telephone infrastructure, our internet, infrastructure, the terrestrial infrastructure. I can see Vladimir Putin's point. You are now using it as part of the war machine, as part of the mission. The Space Force was formed to put capabilities into space and to defend space as a domain. It is now a warfighting domain. Our adversaries have demonstrated their willingness to develop anti-satellite weapons and to test them, which in part has created a bit of a junkyard in space in certain areas. But it is the reality that we live in today. There is both a cyber threat in space as well as a kinetic threat in space. And we have to protect our infrastructure, whether it's government or commercial, in the same way that we do with our terrestrial assets. So it is definitely getting more complicated.
Kevin, we're just about out of time, unfortunately, but I want you, and we did this the last time we talked, and I don't know if your answer will have changed, but look out, if you would, over the next 10 to 15 years in space commerce and Arcfield's role in the industry, and tell me what you see.
Well, I think there's a couple of key missions. If we think maybe 5 or 10 years down the road and look over the horizon, certainly Arcfield will be involved in developing technology differentiated solutions for exploration, for sensing, potentially even for space-based mining, harvesting, energy storage, and the like. As we think about the need to send more missions to Mars, to do more space exploration. There are deep space missions that are of high interest to explore the outer bands of the asteroid belt and maybe even beyond. The need for advanced communications technology, space-based computing, highly survivable sensors, space architectures that are resilient and self-healing are really critical. So, these are the areas where we practice in engineering and integration, and I see Arcfield being a key player in those markets for the foreseeable future.
So you mentioned things like space mining and deep space exploration and such. Is it part of the company's mission to look at those areas outside of the defense and national security milieu?
Absolutely. We're supporting National Science Foundation efforts through Orion. We're looking at work with DARPA. If you think about some of the sensors that I mentioned earlier, bathymetric LiDAR, doing remote spectroscopy, hyperspectral imaging, those are really key technologies, not only for the defense industry, but for finding pockets of ice or water on distant planets, or doing chemical analysis or mineral analysis of an asteroid in the asteroid belt. So those sensors have dual use for sure, and there is a natural inquisitive nature to our exploration of space that will make those technologies more useful for more than just defense missions.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you back on the podcast, and we certainly appreciate your time.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to speak again, Tom.
Kevin Kelly is CEO of Arcfield. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, and many other popular podcasting platforms. Be sure to click on subscribe so you don't miss an episode of the podcast or any of our other videos. You can also get daily updates on space commerce by following the Journal of Space Commerce on Substack. And one thing more, be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on X at XterraJSC. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna go faster, faster. Hands in the air, we're gonna crash. Searching for the answers, like Galileo through his looking glass. Thirst for reason. Our dreamer's eyes we gaze into a sense of purpose, no my view. Like finding water on the moon.